Okay, guys, now we're going to be moving on to the special senses. This lecture piece is only going to be looking at taste and smell, and I'll explain why they're grouped together in a minute. Okay, so let's first talk about what we mean by special senses. Special senses means that it is localized to a particular organ. And so think of your five senses, right? So those are taste, smell, equilibrium, which is your sense of balance and positioning, hearing, and vision. Now, both the taste and the smell, they are going to be grouped together because they are both chemoreceptors, which means that the receptors respond to chemicals. Okay, so what you're smelling is activating the receptors based on the chemicals that are mixed into the air. And then for taste, excuse me, you're activating the receptors based on the chemicals that are mixed into your saliva, so dissolved into your saliva. Okay, so both of them activate because of chemicals, so they are chemoreceptors. And then next time I'll talk about equilibrium and hearing. Both of those are mechanoreceptors, which means that they respond to changes in shape. Specifically in this case, bending of little hairs on the top of them called stereocilia. And then the vision is going to be photoreceptors because they respond to photons of light. Okay, into the taste. In the taste, sorry, on the tongue, you have these little mounds. And I've taught you this word before. Remember the papillary layer of the skin? Papillae means mounds. And on your tongue, you've got these little tiny mounds. And on those are going to be where those taste buds are going to be found. There's two different types. You have fungiform papillae, which are found, well, there's more than two, but there's two that you need to know. There's fungiform papillae, which are found sort of coating most of your tongue, the tiny little bumps all over the front of your tongue. And then you have the vallate papillae, also known as circumvallate. If you ever see that term, it means the same thing. And those are those larger mounds, larger papillae that make a V shape at the back of your tongue. Okay, so you got the fungiform in the front, the smaller ones in the front, and the vallate are the bigger ones that make the V shape in the back of your tongue. Now, if you look at a cross, sort of cut them in half, maybe like a frontal section, here, this whole thing here, that is one papillae, one mound. And then the taste buds are these circular structures that are found on the sides of the mounds. Okay, so those papillae, what they do is they just increase the amount of surface area, and that way you can spit in more of these taste buds. So the whole circular structure is the taste bud. And within a taste bud, you have two different types of cells, and these are modified epithelial cells. You have gustatory, also known as taste cells. I tend to just call them taste cells because that's easier. And then you also have some supporting cells in it as well. And the gustatory or the taste cells are going to synapse with a sensory neuron that will then take the information to the brain. And on the very tip of those little, on the tip of those taste cells, they have these little, let me get this out of the way for you. Those little hairs, okay, and those are just little microvilli that extend outwards and increase the surface area so that they can activate whenever there's chemicals around. Okay, so let's look at, for the tongue, there are three different cranial nerves that carry that taste information. This is what we talked about when we talked about the peripheral nervous system. Do you remember what those three nerves are? What's the one in the very front? We have in the very front, so in front of the vallate papillae here, this area here, that is going to be monitored by the facial nerve here. And then in back, so behind the vallate papillae, you would have the glossopharyngeal. Remember, glosso means tongue, pharyngeal means throat. So that's the back part of the tongue near the throat. And then you also have a third one, which is the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve monitors taste information from the back of the throat. Okay, so not just on your tongue, but you also have taste receptors lining the arch in the back of your mouth. Okay, so do you remember those three? I just said them again. The front half is the facial. The front half of the tongue is the facial nerve. The back third of the tongue is glossopharyngeal, and then the throat area would be the vagus nerve. Okay, on to smell already. For smell, again, it is also chemoreceptors responding to chemicals. And so next time you're in the bathroom, think about that for a minute. The chemicals are there in your nose. Okay, so what happens here is on the roof of your nasal cavity, so here's the nasal cavity, you have these special bipolar cells, bipolar neurons. Remember, bipolar neurons means that they have two processes that extend off of the cell body. You have a dendritic process, and that dendritic process is going to extend downward into the cavity. And it has these little sort of endings, dendritic endings, that are called the olfactory cilia. And those are going to mix in with a mucus lining, and that helps dissolve the chemicals so that you can activate the bipolar neurons more easily. And then once they are depolarized or activated, that's going to send that information up to the axons, and all those axons are going to travel through the foramina of the cribriform plate, and then they will synapse with the with neurons, sensory neurons in the olfactory bulb. And then from there, the olfactory bulb is going to take that information to the olfactory tract. Remember, the tract is part of the brain, so part of the central nervous system, whereas a nerve is part of the peripheral nervous system. And that's going to take the information to the thalamus, which would then divert the information either to the primary olfactory cortex. That's when you're actually going to be aware of it, or you perceive the information, the smell, and interpret the smell. It also sends the information to what's called the limbic system. And the limbic system is a system, which means it has multiple regions involved. For example, there's the thalamus, there's the hippocampus right there, there's the corpus callosum over there. Okay, so it's a whole system that's involved in emotional responses, and that is why some things that you smell can trigger a very strong emotional response. Like, for example, if your mom wears perfume, maybe you associate with that particular perfume a certain emotion, or Christmas smells like, to me, it smells like a cinnamon, that kind of thing. So you can connect senses of smell to emotional responses because it goes through the limbic system as well. Okay, so there's your olfactory bulb, part of the limbic system right there. And you can actually, so what would be the difference between a tract? Because remember, we have nerves here, and then from there we have the tract. So the major difference between a nerve and a tract, both of them are axons of the neurons, but a tract is going to be part of the central nervous system, so part of the brain, or part of the spinal cord, whereas a nerve is going to be part of the peripheral nervous system. Okay, but again, both of them are axons. They're just different locations. Okay, so I did want to talk a little bit about, because your sense of smell connects to your limbic system, part of your limbic system is called the Innate Complex. And the Innate Complex is going to trigger sort of emotional responses too. And so what can happen is, for people who have epilepsy, they can actually get hallucinations. So they can have olfactory hallucinations where they think they smell something, usually it's like a really, really bad smell, before a seizure comes on. Okay, so sometimes they can use it as sort of a warning sign to, like, get ready, here comes a seizure. And it has to do with the connection between the sense of smell and the limbic system. Okay, that's it. You're finished with this taste and smell. Go ahead and take the Census 1 mini quiz. See you next time. Sorry, turn that.